Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karen Pank. I'm the Executive Director for the Chief Probation Officers of California, lovingly called CPOC. And so we're really happy to not only have all of our panel with us today, but all of you listening in on the conversation that we wanted to host today. That conversation, of course, is in celebration of Women's History Month. And so we are honoring some of our women leaders in probation. We will, as many of you who probably have hopefully tuned in before and are returning know, we'll go a little bit round robin and ask a couple of questions of those on the panel. What we want to also encourage all of you listening to do is use the Q&A function to add a couple of questions that you would be interested in having them answer. We'll try to get to as many of those as we can. We often can't get to everything or everyone's question, but we really do find that taking questions that are of most interest to all of you really enrich the conversation that we're hoping to have here today. So with that, I am going to go ahead and get started. And it's my pleasure to, on Women's History Month, to introduce our president of CPOC, who happens to be a woman. And that is fantastic and happens probably more often than not, and happens a lot in our organization as compared to perhaps other organizations. So it's another unique part of what CPOC, I think, gets the opportunity to take advantage of as probation departments do as well. So with that, Chief Jennifer Branning from Lassen County, welcome to today's discussion. And I'll go ahead and say you can unmute. We're all being really good at making sure that we're muted during the other parts of the discussion. And we'll just jump right into that if that works out for you. And feel free to kind of add to some of your question. But I know you have been a chief for several years, and we won't make you say how many years if you prefer not to, but I honestly have enjoyed getting to know you, and certainly we work very closely together now that you're president. But I know folks would be really interested in hearing some of the things that perhaps at the start of your career, not just where you are today, kind of at the pinnacle of your career, what three things you wish someone may have shared with you during that beginning of your time?
Well, first, let me say thank you to everybody for this opportunity. I truly appreciate that. I want to recognize and thank all of our other female participants that are in our audience, our peers. I would also like to thank the amazing women at CPOC. I can tell you honestly that one of the things that I wish somebody would have told me very early on is to make sure that you surround yourself with diverse people. That way you get a diverse perspective. And I can honestly tell you that I have thoroughly enjoyed watching Karen build her team and grow the team at CPOC. She's a mastermind at some of that. And everybody that goes into the CPOC realm just has all of these different strengths that make them the greatest. You go from Whitney to Laura to Rosie to Amy to Mackenzie. That's very diverse. I also like having all of my colleagues who are very diverse people, and I always get a very different perspective. So I wish that that was something that somebody had told me early on, because then I would have surrounded myself with probably different people as well. I think the second piece of advice I would have wanted to hear was to treat yourself like you would treat someone else. I am my own worst critic. I will set my bar higher than anybody else. People sometimes call that being an overachiever. You just do whatever it takes to get the job done, and you move on. And so sometimes, I would be kinder and less judgmental to other people than I am to myself. So I think that's something that I would have loved to have heard early on. And I think lastly, I would say to make the time to take care of yourself, because we tend to give a lot. And when we give too much, we don't have enough left to give. And so then who's going to lead the ship? Who's going to, keep going for us? So I think that's something that I would definitely tell myself as well. I think one of the best conversations that I had recently was with Stephanie Anderson at CPOC, and we were talking on my way home. And I had heard something kind of profound, and it was that you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And that really got me thinking that, you know what, I'm glad that I spend time with a lot of people. So that, I think, those are things that I would have wanted to hear very early on in my career.
Well, it's not fair. I think you guys should have been told ahead of time, you're not allowed to make the host tear up, especially at the beginning of the broadcast. That's just not appropriate. But how awesome to hear, of course, all of the nice things that you shared, but really that last piece, and I can attest, Stephanie Anderson on our staff, who I think hopefully some of you listening know, definitely has a lot of profound things to share almost on a daily basis. I had not heard that one, but I'm writing it down as we are kind of recording these here. But what a great point. Thank you for sharing.
Things. Sorry about that. The most
No.
profound things that I've really heard in the last 5 years have been from CPOC. And so to me, that right there just means a lot, and being able to surround yourself with people involved in the organization.
Well, and the organization, is made up of not only I would 100% agree with you. We have the best of staff around, and we're super proud of them. But it's really the chiefs that make up the association, and that's one of the things that makes these conversations, I think, so helpful, to expose some of that, to hopefully give people a chance to hear those things, not or before they perhaps are in a leadership position, and that may be helpful for when they get there. So thank you for sharing that, and that kind of takes me to really our next question that kind of ties nicely to that. And Chief Fuchs from Sonoma County, I welcome you and thank you for joining us today. I know we're hoping that maybe you could talk about, as you're fairly new to your most recent position as chief, but of course been with Sonoma now for some time and preparing for this role. What were some of the best resources and support for you throughout your career to help you get where you are today?
Well, I also want to thank CPOC for including me on this panel of 5 of the many chiefs of the state of California. I met with our first female chief in anticipation of this webinar. She was the first female chief 2000 to 2006, Chief Cora Guy, and she expressed to me that at the time she was a chief, there was only 5 to 6 female chiefs. So I look at this panel here, and this is 5. And I know we have a lot more since then. I am the second female chief, but I started my career in 1998. And so quickly there, it was always a possibility for me to become a chief because it was in with my own organization. I think the biggest resource for me has been the humans in my life, the humans in the department, the humans that I interact with from community-based organizations, the justice system, including our clients. And so throughout my entire career, and I think back at my very first day in training, when I was training to be back then we were called youth supervisors, but working in the juvenile hall, I literally was sitting there thinking, I can't do this job. The training and what was expected and hearing the stories. And it was the folks in that group of 8 of us that really lifted me up and said, I can do this. And then throughout my career, that's been the case of people just saying, commending me or giving me good feedback or giving me constructive criticism. And so that is still to this day, even as chief, up and down the chain and outside the organization, the people that are willing to take the time to offer feedback, input, just words of encouragement. Joining CPOC, I was given a mentor, a female chief, Chief Eamon Krause from Contra Costa County, and she's been remarkable. But I've also had a lot of strong male mentors in my career, and it was 2 males that were actually the ones that encouraged me to put in to be a supervisor way back when. So I've been extremely fortunate and appreciative. But on top of the humans, and would also be the organizations. APPA has been a great resource. CAPSA, CAPIA, CPOC, of course, if people can get involved in organizations and get outside just their own agency and connect with other folks doing this work, either in the state or throughout the country, it's invaluable. And that way we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We get to learn from each other. So I would say those are my top resources: humans, and then organizations.
That's really helpful. And, something that dawned on me as you were talking, it kind of makes sense to me. Like I've often laid awake at night thinking, how is it possible that no matter who it is, when it is, for some reason, our profession attracts such great leaders. I mean, honestly, we've seen so many chiefs take this role, so many other leaders within probation. What is it about this profession that kind of seems to have an abundance of riches in that area? And it seems like if human interaction, human exposure, diverse human exposure, all those things that were just shared by both you and Chief Branding a moment ago, isn't that also required for the job itself of probation? So it does kind of make a little bit of sense as to, perhaps I just had an aha moment. So thank you, Chief Hughes. I thought maybe that is the key. I keep trying to figure out how to define the secret sauce, and that may be a big piece of it. So I appreciate that. So Chief Nelson, I wanted to ask you, I didn't want to ask you this question, but you begged for it. You said, Karen, this is a question I have a lot of insight on, and I really, really want to share to the group. So this is a little inside joke. Don't tell Karen when you're not happy with your question. But in all honesty, I know you do have a really good answer for it. And one of the things that it's based on is another aha moment we had not too long ago here at the staff level, which was that about 51% of those who work in probation, the probation officers, are female. And I can tell you, whenever I'm having a conversation with somebody who's trying to learn more about probation, whether it's the media, the policymakers, just people in general, they're all like taken aback by that stat. They're just shocked by it. I'm not entirely sure why. That's something that I'd love to get into in a minute. But since it does seem like that is an unusually high number, really, for any profession, much less probably the law enforcement professions, which maybe is why it kind of takes people aback. Why is it important to have women leaders then in probation? Do you think that's part of what maybe drives that large number of women in the profession?
Thank you so much for that question, Karen. And I really think it does. And when you look at the field of probation, and I've heard several times on this call that it's mentioned law enforcement, but when you look at women, what we provide is balance. And so even, we all know what's going on nowadays as far as the negative connotations sounding around the word law enforcement. And we are probation, and we provide that. We are that go-between. We are the perfect balance between law enforcement and social support. And so, people often ask us, what is probation, if they don't know? And it can be hard to explain. For women to be 51% of the profession is highly important. I think it's because we really believe and embody what is connection. And so when you work in probation, that is what you're doing. You're making connections. You are connecting with clients. You are connecting with one another, whether that's through the networks that were discussed here. You connect with other agencies, and no other profession can basically navigate between those worlds. And I think as women, just growing up in this world, and definitely in this country, we've had to navigate between worlds that, men have not had to because it has been a predominantly man operated field. So now that you have 51% of the profession, and, like it was mentioned earlier, all of the, women chiefs who are profound leaders in the field of probation, you see a shift in that. It's important that we operate those spaces for, diversity reasons and to provide different perspectives. When looking at this question, I had also been looking at a policy on professional dress. And I'm the first female chief in San Diego County. So I'm still astonished that I have to say that statement is 2023. Probation's been around for over 100 years, and we're still saying first. But in a simple policy as professional dress, I can see the lack of diversity in assessing that policy, from, the number of earrings and your hair, how it should be, and the fact that we're still explaining those things. It really kind of appalls me, but that was just the nature of the field. So when we see 51%, I think it's a wonderful thing. It shows progress, but it certainly, as Chief Branning said, as women, I think we are our worst critics, and we're like, hey, yeah, I'm gonna set this standard high, but for me, it's got to be up here. And I just think that's the regular standard. And it's because being first, or in law enforcement fields where it shouldn't be strange that a law enforcement organization or a public safety organization is 51% women, but it is. But that just means we are advocating and pushing down doors and knocking down ceilings that have been placed before us for others to come up into these roles, provide those diverse opinions and those diverse views, and include what most of us come into this profession for, is that connection.
See, that wasn't that hard. You did a great job. I know, I really appreciate that. And I know you'll have other things to add as well as we go on. I want to pause here for a moment just to remind folks. I know folks are probably listening intently to some of the conversation, but to feel free to use the Q&A so that you have an opportunity to get your question in the queue as we move on. So with that, I want to go to Chief Katie Miller from San Francisco next. Oh, she was like, she wasn't sure. I'm changing up the order there. So there you go. Got to keep everybody on their toes. So I appreciate you joining again. I think you've been on these webinars before, and so I know we've probably covered the parts of the question that we wanted to start off with you on, but I know that, and maybe not everybody is aware, that you had maybe a different or unique path into finding your way into probation as the chief. And so if maybe you can talk a little bit about that, and then and really what attracted you to the field of probation at this stage of your career.
Yeah, you totally got me by changing the order. Keeping us on our toes, CPOC, always keeping us on our toes. Thank you. And yeah, I'm really glad and honored to be here today among these other women leaders and CPOC and everybody who's listening. And yeah, I feel like I always get the like the weird question, right? So it is true. I come to this job, actually, this role at probation. I'm kind of a windy path. So I'm not a career probation officer who's kind of done the work in the trenches and come up this way. I have had a long career in the criminal justice system, and particularly in the juvenile justice system. But I've done the work through a whole bunch of different lenses. So I've been a public defender, represented kids in dependency when they were removed from their parents. I've done policy work in the mayor's office. I've worked at CBOs in the community. And for 12 years before I came here, was a prosecutor here in San Francisco. And so a lot of different steps along the way, but for me, this is absolutely the right place to land. I think the kind of through line for me is a really deep belief in the potential of kids and our real need to do right by kids, right? Getting it right with kids is everything to me. and all of our kids, right? And I think that, you know, for me consistently, I've just really felt an obligation to serve in public service. And I think that, you know, what I love about probation, I would say there's a couple of things. One thing is like the vast reach of this field. My counterpart here in San Francisco, Chief Crystal Tulloch, if she was here, she would, so since she's not here, I'm going to quote her because it's Women's History Month, but she would say that, she does say that probation kind of stands at the intersection of law enforcement and social work and social justice. And I love that because I think it really describes like the immense scope of this work. We are kind of all the things. And so I think it's a really great place to ask the question about how do we be the best of all the things. And what really kind of keeps me going with it is that, you know, Karen knows this from all of my texts at odd hours, but, you know, I think a lot about the fact that like, we are the experience that people and young people often have with government. Like we are right often, especially for young people, schools and law enforcement, it's kind of the places where they experience government. And I think the ability to have them experience government as fair and just and in their service and wanting their success is a great ideal for us to always be striving for. And so that's kind of why I've landed here and why I really love being here and doing this work with all of these other fine women.
Well, we're very lucky to have you, and as you pointed out, yes, we've had some deep thoughts and conversations, and you know, kind of along those broad terms, and you know, the role that you all do is so important in the community because it does kind of set forth generational impact, it seems to me, and you kind of touched on that there, and so it's just really important that it continues to be supported and continue to be looked at and adjusted to do the types of things that you all have been charged to do. And again, having the opportunity to observe this field for quite some time now, seeing how that has happened over the years, really important and pretty magical, honestly. And so it's really nice to hear that probably much like yourself, I did not grow up in a probation department or as an officer, coming to this kind of call of work and having such a rich appreciation for it is just it kind of proves the point, right? That it is important work and that and people can see that. And so I will take our talk now to our last panelist and Chief Rochester from Merced County. So you have also been with us before and on one of these discussions. So please feel free to add any kind of intro that you may want to the discussion. But the question that we have for you is, what kind of adversities did you face or maybe currently face as a woman in the profession?
Hi, Karen. Thank you for having me. It is a privilege to be here, especially with all of these esteemed chiefs, some new and some who have been around for quite some time. I appreciate it. I thought about your question, and I've grown up in probation. So I am coming around, I think, to my 23rd year. And working in the field of probation, and I have stayed with Merced County for my entire career. So I grew up in this county, and so in terms of adversity, I will say that, this is the central region, and so coming from a central region county, there are quite a few adversities that a lot of us face, I think, but I was the first female chief probation officer. I know Chief Nelson said, she can't believe that we're still saying that we're the first. And not only that, I'm the first female chief law enforcement officer in Merced County. So when I attend the local chiefs meetings, I'm typically the only female there. So it's different. But in a lot of ways, I think that because I grew up in the county and I know a lot of the other chiefs who are at the table, I may not face the same type of adversity as others may face who didn't grow up in the county. But one thing I have noticed is that, previous chiefs who were here, it seemed as though maybe there was some sort of a competition with other, the sheriff's department. And I think that that has a lot to do with male egos and, feeling like you have to constantly compete. But I think most of the chiefs that I work with understand that I'm very comfortable in my own skin. And I know what probation brings to the table. And I know that we bring more than many law enforcement agencies can bring. We know families. We don't just know individuals. We know the entire family because we've been working with the entire family. There's so much value that we can bring with the knowledge that we have in working with the family unit rather than just having just an initial conversation with someone on the street. And so I think that the more we share that, I feel like the more other chiefs and other law enforcement agencies are like, hey, maybe we should bring probation to the table. And so I'm consistently reminding the local chiefs in our meetings about that and the fact that we have a lot of information. And again, I just go back to being comfortable in your own skin and recognizing what you bring and not having that chip, because it's important for when you're working with other departments. I've learned adversity is never a good thing. So you can have the respectfully disagree with a certain feeling or what have you, but not taking things personally is extremely important as well. This is business, and at the end of the day, we have to treat business like business. And so as long as we can be passionate about how we feel about something, because sometimes the local chiefs here are like, whoa, you're getting too passionate or whatever. But I think it's important not to take those things personally. So for me, it's been kind of an easy transition. Sometimes I notice some things and I'm like, would you have said that if I was a male chief probation officer? And I do think that sometimes, but I remember and remind myself, don't take it personally and just move right along past it. So
I appreciate that. I suspect, and I was looking around the horn here as you were saying some of those comments, and I think we all kind of, nodded our heads at a couple of those points. And, adversity may be the wrong question, really. I think you kind of bring an interesting point to it. Because it does feel like that's another common denominator with some of the, really female or otherwise chiefs, you really leaders, you need to be comfortable in your own skin. And so if that's the case, you learn to potentially deal with those challenges and not see them as an adversity or something that has to be, kind of conquered or hurdled over, but just kind of a something that just exists, and it doesn't have to change who you are or how you approach the situation. So it seems like, in my observation, that's certainly what I can see many of you doing in a variety of different circumstances.
And Karen, before you move on,
Please.
just a little bit on that, not so much taking it personally, but I do take it as a challenge. And because as a female chief, when you walk in those rooms, you're already questioned. And I don't think it's right. And where your resume and your qualifications and your right to belong in that room is almost like you have to prove that you belong in the room. And so, for us, and I'll just speak for myself, it's like getting over the fact I don't have to prove anything. I'm in the room. And so I take it as a challenge, because I do know that, there will be other female chiefs that come behind me. And I need to ensure and do my part to ensure that that door stays open. And so I do take it as a challenge while also balancing the fact that, had I been a man, I might not have faced those same questions or those same things. And also making sure that, is it a female thing or is it a probation thing? Because if you're dealing with, let's say, a conservative law enforcement group, they really don't like probation. and it's just like, and it's the simple answer is, we are following the law. We know you don't understand why you get to come out of custody or why somebody doesn't get to go into custody, but we are simply following the law. And that's and they may not need to understand that because that's not their function. And so that's why as women, we stay in that balance, which I think, I often joke, I say, oh, probation is the mother of law enforcement. We provide that support, but when you're acting up, we give you that tough love and you're sanctioned, if you will. You're grounded because you didn't do this or whatnot. So that's how I kind of describe probation. And so when you are facing those adversities, those are all the things that have to run through your mind, especially if you're the first woman or you're the only woman in those spaces. In addition to, while we're all chiefs and it's wonderful, we still are trying to navigate the culture of what it is to be a woman in those spaces when you have to report to a presiding judge or a CEO or CAO or a board of supervisors who may have not traditionally navigated within the culture of what it is to be a woman in leadership.
Very great point, as usual. I noticed that we are getting some questions from the audience, so I'm going to throw one out here and see please, anybody who wants to take a stab at it, go ahead and unmute and do so. And we don't have to just take one answer, of course, but I think this is very similar to what we tend to hear from many of our webinars, right? It's probably the issue of the moment in many ways, but what do you suggest for upper management teams, chiefs and assistant chiefs, to help line staff in institutions have a healthy work-life balance in terms of work schedules, removing barriers to work? And that probably goes beyond really the institutions, but certainly institutions I know have a variety of different challenges that may interfere with the balance. And so curious as to how you do that. And I suspect it has a lot of impact, maybe, different to women at times. So
I'll take a try at that. I always make sure that I try to do something for myself, no matter how big or how small it is. And that would be my advice. Whether you do 5 minutes of yoga, whether you go run a mile, whether you go paddleboarding with no cell service for the day, take at least 5 minutes to just focus on yourself. And with that 5 minutes, that's something that we sometimes don't even give ourselves, is just that 5 minutes. So that's part of my suggestion. My other part is to always do something that is for yourself. Make sure that you see something that you want to cook, you try it, you try something new and you push yourself and you challenge yourself without thinking about work. And make sure that as a leader, I promote that within our department. People know that I'm going to go paddleboarding where there's no cell service. People know that I might just bust out with 5 minutes of yoga in my office. It's just to be able to have that minute to think.
Karen, do you mind if I add to that? Because I absolutely agree with you, Chief Branning, and really is finding that time, scheduling that time with something that just brings you joy. But I want to go back to the question, and I really want to acknowledge that all of our staff working in institutions are experiencing a lot right now. There's a lot of counties up and down the state, Sonoma County being one of them, that before COVID even hit, we were dealing with disaster after disaster, evacuations due to floods, due to fires. And then COVID hit. Many of our institutions, their staff are still working with masks on. Many of our institutions are in mandatory overtime, are being denied vacation time. So I'm not helping by saying these things, but at the same time, acknowledging that this is happening all at the time that a significant shift in juvenile justice is now hitting all of our local counties with SB 823 and juvenile realignment. So I want to acknowledge that first. And then I want to acknowledge that it is vitally important that we're checking in with our staff. Those counties that have peer support, sending peer support to check in with staff that are not only dealt with their own trauma from all of the disasters in their communities, but supporting our clients through these same challenges while being in custody. And, you know, where we can give those people grace and time and space within the institutions. We can't always let people leave the institution, but breaking people, checking in with people. And then to your point, Chief Brandy, when you do have that time, is reaching out to mentors or doing something that just gives you joy, and scheduling it, making that just as important as showing up to work on time, because our well-being, if we're not taking care of ourselves, we can't take care of our clients. And our health and well-being, and creating wellness programs within your organizations, if that's possible. I know in our organization, we have a group of people that occasionally do meditation at lunchtime for those that can do it. I know in our institutions, they can't just clock out and go do some meditation and some yoga, but wherever you can, are having wellness spaces so that even if they can't do it outside of work, while they're at work, they can also be taking care of themselves.
Chief Nelson.
And just to add to that, I think part of the question is, what can managers do to help? And, you know, I often say this is not an I problem, this is a we problem. And so, you know, I think being open and inviting people to the table, you know, invite your line staff to the table. How can we help address this problem? This problem, as you heard from the different chiefs, is not unique to one department. It's not unique to probation. It's not unique to law enforcement. It's throughout the nation. And it's like, okay, how can we all come together to address this problem? And also, how can we provide balance, work-life balance? And, you know, I can't remember which chief has said, it's like, hey, that's a lie. You can't ever have work-life balance. You're either devoting yourself to work or you're either devoting yourself to home. And it's like, no, you can. It won't be 50-50. Certain times, you know, oh no, this week, because it's more work, I have to 70% work, 30% home. Or, oh, you know, it's a light schedule, so it's going to be 70% home, 30% work. It's never going to completely balance out with 50-50. And those are the times that we live in. You know, I was hoping after the pandemic that we would see a shift, but I think we are seeing a shift. And that's why you see what we have now. People have reevaluated their lives and saying, what are the priorities here? And I think as a profession and as an organization, we have to do the same too. People have done it personally, and now we need to do it as part of the profession. What are our priorities? What are we trying to accomplish? And what outcomes are we looking to see? And how does that work operationally? And the only way we're going to do that is if we bring everybody to the table with ideas. Now, you know, each one of us are brilliant. Karen, you're the most smartest. That's the right term. You know, but we don't have all the answers. Not one of us. If we did, I can hang up the chief title and, you know, run my $100 million company from some private island that I purchased because I have all the answers. That is not the case here. None of us do. And so again, that brings back to basically our connections, our diversity, and bringing those voices to the table. In order to do something different, in order to see something different, we have to do something different. How we operated in the past is not working for how we need to operate in light of all the changes that have come towards probation. And so we all need to come together at the table with different voices and figure out how can we make things better for one, our staff, who also in part, when our staff are doing better, then our clients do better. We all know that. And so how do we bring them to the table and have these discussions on what can we do to help bring back that work-life balance, to get out of overtime, to take that 5 minutes of yoga, or happen to run into Chief Branning paddleboarding, because you are also paddleboarding. I'm not running a mile. I'll do maybe a quarter loop with my dog, and that's pushing it sometimes. But how can we have that for our staff? Because that different self-care means different things to everybody. So how can we help our staff incorporate that into their daily routine at the job, and also encourage them to do that when they're not at the job as well?
You know, it's really important advice, and obviously an important topic, because I will say, of all the questions that have come in so far, they all kind of surround this issue, and something that I'm curious about, because one of the questions, I will admit, because you know, sometimes I tell I overshare, I guess is the point, but I didn't know what one of the concepts was referring to in the question. So I'm going to read it as it came in, and then I'm going to share with you, based on what I Googled, I get the context clues of what this is all about. So now you know I am not the smartest person on this panel or listening in. So there you go. But the question was, do you have insight or recommendations regarding the theory and very real reality for many women of the double day for women in law enforcement? And the concept, I think, as I understand it, if Google didn't let me down here, is the fact that if you're a woman in the workforce, you have a full-time job in the workforce, and then you go home and you have another job. You know, I think we've heard in times a lot of that, like, well, that's not right, and that's kind of being shared more, and those various different things. And I think we're seeing a lot of that. So certainly don't mean to say, you know, because the picture that popped up was something from the 1950s, by the way. So, but it is real, and I recognize, you know, I definitely, I'm embarrassed that I didn't know that term, because I've lived it my entire career. So, and I'm sure all of you have as well. But what I want to link that to, because that was a standalone question, but then we talked a little bit about how COVID has changed kind of some of the workforce, you know, balance and wellness questions. They're tied together in a unique way for women, it seems to me, right? We've kind of been dealing with something that the entire workforce right now seems to be dealing with because of COVID, prior to COVID, right? If you're a woman working full-time in an institution, in law enforcement, just working full-time in general, right? How are you balancing all of that? And so maybe we have the key answer. I'm hoping somebody does, right? Because this isn't a new phenomenon in some ways. It's just now exacerbated because of, I think, a lot of the things that we have been traumatized by what happened through the COVID kind of the pandemic itself. So that was a lot of talk, and I'm not supposed to do all of that, but I just found it fascinating how all these questions are starting to meld together. And so there's got to be a good question in there somewhere. I've given a lot of thought or a lot of talk so that you guys have had time to think about it. Jump in and, you know, start debunking some of the stuff or adding to it. Any suggestions?
So I'm only going to pile on and say that I had never heard that expression either, but I will say that when my sons were little, I actually felt like it was a triple day, right? Like I would be driving to work in the morning and I would feel like I had already had a day, just getting everybody up and out. And then starting my work day, and then knowing at the end of the day I was going home to another day, right? So like 3 shifts. You know, I think there's a few things, and I'm still also trying to figure out what you were talking about, Karen, with kind of how COVID has changed perspective and thought for folks. you know, I do think that for folks who are either raising children or caring for a parent at home or another family member, because I feel like we can like also have those bookend family obligations. You know, for me, I do think that going back to something that Chief Nelson said, I don't think it's about balance as much as harmony. I was on another Women's History Month panel last week where one of the other panelists said that. So it is not my idea. Like I did not come up with that. But what the person's point was that they had to find harmony instead of balance because you were never going to feel balanced. But that sometimes one obligation would be heavier and one would be lighter. And like that was how you kind of rode the wave. I also think that sometimes it's just going to be really hard, right? Because of the age of your kids or the age of your parents or something else, and that things ebb and flow. And sometimes you're just taking that deep breath and kind of getting through it all. For what it's worth for me, you know, at the end of a really long day at work, I actually, one thing I try to find for myself is some like perspective and healing in the very tangible things that I have to do on my second shift, right? Or my first shift in the morning. Like when I have finished making breakfast or I have finished doing the laundry, it's tangible and it's done and it's complete. And that is like a stark contrast to the stuff we're trying to do all day. Because like you don't know when justice is done. Like when do you cross that finish line? But we make really hard decisions all day long. Like, you know, is somebody doing well? Do they need to come back in? Do we need to go to the judge? Does something need to happen? Like how big is risk? Like we make these really hard decisions that you don't get to look up somewhere and you don't get to like check and see if you got the test right. But a lot of the things that I find in my other job of parenting and being a wife and being a daughter, I feel like I know better when those things are done. So I find that balance for myself. I think for COVID, what was so hard for a lot of members of this department, and particularly women in this department, was that their jobs no longer had different shifts. Was that during the pandemic, they were trying to do their job. And while schools were closed, they also had their other job, right? So they were like double dipping in their jobs at the same time. And I think everybody is still coming out of that. There's deep impacts for people. And also at a time when then caring for people and obligations at home also felt really unsettling, and the world felt unsettling. Like there was no finishing the laundry at that time. Everything felt ambiguous. I do feel like trying to balance it all makes you be a little focused. Like you have to kind of figure out what's important and what you can let go. And honestly, I think one thing I would say, and this may be the most unhelpful for folks, but you know, I think it's important for my kids to see me as a woman in a position of power and authority. And I think it's okay for them to know, and my kids are old now, so I can say this without like sitting in my car and crying because I'm missing the field trip. But like, I think it's okay that in the course of their lives, they knew that I couldn't be at things because I was trying to affect change for a lot of people in important ways. Like, I think that's okay. It's always been okay for men in positions of leadership to do that, and for kids to understand, right, that maybe that's why dad wasn't at my baseball game. And I think they get a lot from seeing their moms do work. And so it's okay for them to experience some sacrifice along with it, says the woman with like the older kids. So now, but I do think that, and you know, I think it's the slog, and that's why you're getting so many questions. It's the hardest thing. Balancing our obligations is so hard, no matter what they are.
I like the word harmonizing. That makes a lot of sense. Chief Rochester, did you have something you wanted to add?
Well, Chief Miller said a lot of what I was thinking, but one of the things, and I will say that, you know, my daughter is 19, but growing up as a probation officer, one of the things that was on the top of my list was to always have a backup person and a backup plan. So if you get stuck and you need someone to pick your child up make sure that you have a person that you trust and that is on that list, and that your child knows, like, hey, you know, if mom's not here, this is who's going to be there. That to me was like, so that my daughter knew that, you know, I had a plan for her in the event that mom got stuck somewhere. I promoted late, but that didn't mean that as an institution officer, you know, I didn't get held over, or as a deputy probation officer, that I didn't get stuck at a house for hours on end, waiting for social services, or that I needed to stay and complete a report. So that being said, I also though have my mom who lives with me. And so I'm caring for her. And, you know, I live by my calendar. And so I have very specific on my calendar what needs to happen every single day where I'm supposed to be. And I prioritize things on my calendar, like what is absolutely most important. I do a lot of meal prepping. I get up at 5 something in the morning, and typically I make dinner, and it's either in the fridge or in the crock pot, so that if I'm not home, like right at 6 o'clock, then people can eat. And I think just showing yourself some grace, just like Chief Miller said, you know, sometimes we're going to miss stuff, and it's definitely never intentional. It's just, you know, showing yourself that grace though, when you do miss something, is extremely important, so that you're not so hard on yourself, because we're all working very hard in this profession. We are all affecting change in people's lives in many different ways. And so explaining that to our kids and to our family and what happens in our day-to-day lives, without oversharing, I think it's important for them to understand that, so that they know that, you know, mom is out there trying to make a difference in people's lives, and that, you know, it may not have a direct impact on you now, but it will have an impact on you in your future. And so that's what's important to me. So.
Perspective is so important in anything, and giving your child that, as well as perhaps you know, those who are working for you and kind of going through this slog as well, could be really helpful. It dawned on me, and this may be a naive question, maybe I again am going into oversharing, but do any of you still do, and this may be a bit of a dated practice, but take your kid to work days in your departments? I mean, I know that
We
may
encourage
have
it.
been, okay, I mean, it may have been suspended in large part because of COVID, but you know, prior, and now that we're coming out of it, and you know, what dawned on me is a little bit about what was just being shared about, you know, kind of sharing with your kid kind of the bigger picture, and that helps bring perspective for them. But I'm also wondering if it's a bit of a morale booster for your staff, and that was one of the questions that we received as well, because you know, sometimes it can be really important for them to have their kids see how important the role is that they do in the community. And it seems like a small thing, but I can tell you, at a time when we don't do it in our office necessarily, but now it makes me think we should. But at one point I was in an office where we had an opportunity to do that. And it was huge. It was a huge morale booster for me. It was a memorable thing that my daughter, like, to this day still talks about. And so I wonder if that can kind of be a double, have a double benefit. So, and if it's stupid, don't say it on air, because we're actually going to record, this is being recorded.
No, it's a really great point. We've had it a few times, and I've known the impact to the staff that brought their son, and they got to sit there, and how it was just so impactful for them to see their son acknowledge what they do and see where they work. And then one of our divisions hosts trick-or-treating every Halloween. And so they decorate their cubicles, and all the little kids come around, and it's it's just such a great feeling. And I think it's so great for the staff to be able to, these are the people, the humans they talk about all the time with their coworkers, and now they get to meet them, and vice versa. Their kids hear about their coworkers and they get to meet them, and just have some joy in the workplace that often we don't have those opportunities in probation work very often.
Yeah. Wow, that was heavy. There was a lot of stuff that we were unpacking there, which is clearly on the minds of folks based on some of the questions that are coming in. One thing that we also hear often about on these panels is kind of just switching it up for a moment now, general advice around career advancement. So kind of focusing in on women specifically because of the the month that we're celebrating, we've got, the women leaders sitting here on this panel. What types of things would you suggest, or what advice would you give to try to help maybe someone who's listening who wants to continue to advance within their career? What can they do?
Well, I can say people need to get very comfortable with public speaking. And really taking your thoughts and centering them and bringing them together, especially for interviews, especially for when you're speaking with your board of supervisors, speaking up in court. Really sharpening your public speaking skills is important. You can do that at local community colleges, or I'm sure that they have Toastmasters, which are public speaking groups that go through some of those nuances and whatnot. So I think that that's one thing I would say.
I'm going to end where I started today, which is on like the weird topic, which is that like one piece of advice I would give is to raise your hand when the leader of the department is looking for volunteers to try something new. And I think there's a few reasons for that. One reason is it's often because it's a priority of the leader of your department. And when that's happened for me in the past, at all the places in government that I've worked, it's meant that I got to have extra time with that person, which also kind of results in a mentorship role, right? With that leader, really hearing about their priorities, hearing their perspective overall about the department you're a part of. And I just found that it was always really kind of rewarding and taught me a different aspect of the work we were doing. And so I think it's an important thing to raise your hand and kind of take those leaps of faith. I was talking this morning to our new juvenile hall director, who's also a woman. And she said the same thing, right? She was in Alameda County for 24 years. And she said she always raised her hand for the new thing. I think it's just a great way to kind of add experience to your career as you're putting in your time, as you're working toward promoting, and giving you some of that access.
I would agree. I think that consistently placing yourself in uncomfortable situations will definitely help you. I hate public speaking, but I consistently try to volunteer to place myself in that situation so that I can get more experience. I also watch myself and critique myself, which is horrific. Like, it is the worst. And to see how many times I say or I wave my hands around like a crazy person or whatever the case may be. I try to do that. And like I said, just if you consistently place yourself in these uncomfortable situations, then when you're a leader within your agency and these things happen, you've already kind of prepared yourself for the different nuances that occur in day-to-day work as a leader, because you've placed yourself in these kind of situations already. And so I think it's extremely important so that you're never going to be fully prepared, but just like Chief Miller said too, like volunteering for things that you may not be interested in, but it is obviously important to your chief if they have specifically asked. And so just gives you that different kind of exposure. It's important.
Can I just add a little bit, because I agree with everything everyone's saying, and I know any staff in my organization that has come to me for advice on promoting, the one thing, and I think some of them are tired of me saying this, is become a student of probation. Learn about your organization and learn about the community. Get outside of the silo that you've been working in. Where you can spread your wings and learn more. And I use this example all the time. It took me 11 years to find out that there was a specific division in our organization that I knew nothing about. I didn't know it was run by probation. I knew nothing about it. And so I feel like to this day, we still probably have folks in our organization that don't know the different nuances just internally. So when you're out and realizing when you're out there in the community, people say, oh, you work for probation, and we have all of these great programs. And they may not know about those programs, or that we run a day reporting center, or that we have pretrial services, or that we even run a detention facility, because a lot of people think the sheriff's department runs it. So really knowing about your own organization and then taking it outside of that and learning about what's been going on reforms in the state of California. And I know CPOC has a great wiki page. Oh God, sorry, my phone just rang. That was really inappropriate. But where you can, and you have, and I know we've talked about how folks are running on all cylinders and they're already working hard. And so it takes a lot of energy to want to go outside of that even further. So sorry, something's going on with my phone right now. So I'm going to put myself on mute until I figure that out. But I hope you got the gist of it.
We did, although it does now worry me that if somebody is that, needing to get a hold of you, that we don't lose you here. But I do think the phone was ringing when you had mentioned the wiki page. We do, on our website, you can probably find a couple of different links for that. And it doesn't have to mean, I can't remember what sitcom that we probably all saw at some point where the person goes and enters every club and every new event. You don't have to do everything, right? But trying to stretch where it still keeps you within the balance discussion that we were just talking about, is still potentially a way to grow. That certainly seems to resonate in a lot of other panels as well that we've kind of covered in the past. One thing that I'm curious about, and maybe this ties to this question, but at what point did each of you decide or know that you wanted to take the leap into a leadership position? So either share with us when that was, when you first decided to take a leadership position, doesn't have to be the chief, or when you did decide, at what point in your career did you decide you did eventually want to become chief? Can you share those with us? And I'd love to hear from each of you. So whoever's comfortable jumping in, go for it.
Let me jump in. And it's funny you asked this question, Karen, because last night I was doing a little writing about this question, and I do a lot of self-reflection. And so I don't know if I ever decided to take a leadership position, whereas it was decided for me. And not that I didn't go for a promotion. I certainly don't buy into you need to have a certain title to be a leader. It is, basically leaders are chosen by a group of people, and you just kind of become that. And so I did not seek promotion for leadership positions, but I certainly didn't seek promotions for the title. And I tell people this, it's very hard to explain. It's almost like a calling. And, I've done a leadership class, and it wasn't a very popular statement to say is, okay, now you're going for this promotion. Here's, everybody's like, oh, what do you need to know to promote this? And think, you're giving the secret answers to these test questions that we all have to go through for interviews that are horrible. And we're like, oh, you'll be fine. And then you get in the same interview and you're like, oh my God, what the heck am I doing? But, I've always asked the question, we have the most qualified, competent, highly skilled people working in our organization, and many of them go for the same promotion. The question is not whether you should go for the promotion, or not, if you're qualified, but whether you should go for the promotion. And that's not to say, oh, you're not qualified, you're not competent. The question is, are you ready to do everything that job entails past the title of the job? And that is the public speaking, that is the heavy responsibility. What we do in probation and working with our clients or community members or whatnot, that to me is the easy part. But when you are in a people-oriented business, that is very complex and that is very complicated, because you're dealing with different personalities, with learning styles, personal issues, personnel matters. And so the question is, are you ready for what that position entails? And if you are not, then you need to ask yourself the question, should you go for the promotion? And that is a big question. Now, some of you may already be doing that as women. You like, yeah, I manage things. I'm a great time scheduler because I manage my kids' soccer schedule. I get my work on time, my meal prepping, and I got my 5 minutes of yoga. So you have all of these skills and attributes to go for certain positions, but you ask yourself, should. Now, as women, we tend to downplay our skills and our abilities. They don't all have to come from the job. They can come from everything that you do. And just breaking down what the big words say in those applications or those promotions, the question is, are you ready for the responsibility? Not are you ready for the title? And evaluate that. And only you, as evaluating yourself personally, can say, yes, I'm ready. Because what you do not want to do is when you get in those leadership roles and then you are reporting to someone and they expect you that you wanted to deal with those responsibilities, is look at the leader and say, what do you want me to do? Or how do I, there's going to be some training, but they expect you that you wanted to handle those responsibilities, not shift those responsibilities up or not shift those responsibilities to someone else. So it really is a personal question on that. And so when I did go for those questions, that was the question, like, yeah, I have the qualifications, but should I go? And I went for, the leadership positions. I got some, I didn't get some. And if I got them, then I say it was meant to be, but I was ready to step up for the responsibility of what the whole role entails. So you have to be ready for the responsibility of what the whole role entails. And I think it was Chief Miller talking about, reach out, and also Chief Fuchs, step out of those silos, avail yourself to others in different units, different divisions, different departments. Talk to other leaders in different organizations to get that diverse view, to see what does that responsibility look like, and do I have the capacity to deal with that level of responsibility at this time?
Thank you.
I
Others?
I think for me, Karen, I remember sitting at my desk and I had just read an email that came from administration, and I was like, oh, I was frustrated by the email, and I closed the email, and then I started thinking to myself, you can either complain about it or you can step up and become a part of the solution rather than complaining about, these mandates and rules and policies and procedures that are being pushed down. And so for me, I recognize that I have experience in the field of probation. I've experienced the institution, and I really felt like it was time for me to step into a role to pave the way and to try to make the difficult jobs that we're already doing a little bit easier by having a voice at the table to say, no, that's really probably not going to work. And now that I'm a chief, I heavily rely on my team because I'm not out there performing the work day to day anymore. So I have to rely on them to let me know what's working, what's not working. And I give them a voice at the table to tell me that. And so I guess I recognized what I didn't like from administration when I was a DPO, and I knew what I wanted to change if I had the ability to promote. And just like Chief Nelson, like I was very happy being an assistant chief. I thought it was fantastic. I had the best of both worlds. I was going from the facility to the field and managing things, and my chief decided that it was time for him to retire. And then I thought to myself, if either I'm going to sit back and have someone come to my department and maybe make some changes that I feel would take us on a bad path, or do I want to be a part of the solution and helping to effect change and pave the way for all of the younger leaders that are coming up in my department. And I love this department, my department, and I love its people. And so I feel that it is my responsibility to do that. It's personal to me. So.
Thank you. Those are great additions. Others, you want to add anything, or what that moment was when you thought it meant it was appropriate or time for you, or motivated you to become a leader or step into a leadership role?
I can say that I was 6 years on graveyards at our juvenile hall, and I was working 2 jobs. So I still didn't know that probation was my career path. I loved what I did, but I also was coaching at a local university. And so, living off of 4 hours of sleep a day doesn't really get you time to kind of plan your whole career and which one. So I was waffling between being a coach for my career or working in probation. And it goes back to the humans that tapped me and said, I think you should put in for this. And I think you should come off of graveyards for this new opportunity. At that time, it was a newly created position. They were hiring 5 people to it. And it wasn't a supervisory position, but it was a lead position. And I felt, and since it was new and it was an opportunity where I didn't see myself and only working graves my entire career, I didn't feel like I was equipped to be a supervisor yet, but really willing to kind of see what the days looked like. And once I made that leap and started to interact with even more people and got to see staff or stakeholders, and I never met anybody from health services before then, and they're all working during the day, and then from there, just interacting with more and more people and then seeing what all the possibilities were, I think that's when my eyes kind of started to open to a career in probation and really getting into what an impact that we do make in the community. And I was like, yeah, I want to be a part of that. Coaching is fun, but I want to be a part of making a difference in the community that I live. And then from there, it's in going back to what Chief Nelson said, is meeting with the people that are doing the jobs, because you're interviewing for a job and they're interviewing you. So you want to make sure you know what it is that you're signing up for, so that you're not there and there's some surprise or expectation that you didn't know. And so, through the various promotions in my career, I was never, my whole being wasn't tied to that promotion. I loved at every step of the way what I was doing. And so I was perfectly fine with not getting it. And there was one promotion only that I did not handle well, that I didn't get it. And I realized later I wasn't ready for it. If I can't even handle a no, then I wasn't ready for that position. Because there is a lot of talent in all of our organizations, and we can't expect that we're going to get every position, but to keep on it and to keep learning about what each position is and the expectations. And I'll say that, I never thought I would be sitting in this seat. It wasn't like an aspiration when I started that, one day I want to be chief. But I'm very fortunate. I'm very proud to be leading this organization. I've grown up in this organization, but being happy with where I was. And I love being an assistant chief or a deputy chief, because it's always nice to have one person ahead of you. And we had a great chief before, so he was a great mentor. But, through circumstances, I'm here and I'm grateful, and I'm very proud to be at this table with all of the other chiefs and to be a chief within this county.
Well, I appreciate that. You know, as we're getting closer to the end of our time, one thing that I thought might be nice to also get from everyone is there's probably been, and you just touched on it, Chief Fuchs, a mentor. You know, here we are celebrating, you know, Women's History Month. We've talked about, you know, our profession must do something right that for women, because it attracts so many women and obviously elevates so many great leaders. But I'm curious personally, I'm sure others are as well. Maybe give homage to that mentor in your past or currently that kind of helped you be a strong woman leader in the profession. Oh, this
Well,
wasn't fair because I didn't
start.
prepare you for it, but thank you as president, Chief Branding. I was going to call on you first to get the ball rolling. So thanks for jumping in.
Yes. You know, I will thank the many women who raised me. I will thank my mother. She has done a lot for me. I will thank my aunts because I had several of them. They've taught me a lot as well. They taught me how to be who I was and be bold and not be afraid. They taught me how to speak my mind in a way that isn't horrible, that isn't demeaning to others. They taught me how to be kind. They taught me how to be generous. They taught me how to really see what people need and what people want, as well as myself. So I would say that those were the biggest mentors that I had in my life to develop me where I'm at today. And then interspersed with that, a lot of women. There's just been a lot of women that have come and gone in my life. I think of some of our past chiefs, Mary Butler, Stephanie James, Linda Penner. I think of some of them. I think of CPOC staff. So surrounding yourself with a lot of really strong women always helps too.
The same, her mother, her aunts. But you know, no, seriously, you know, anybody that knows me all of this comes from my mother. And it's the same, you know, she was a nurse, and she actually was a nurse in the juvenile hall and at the jail at the time. And there goes my entry into the career probation, because she brought me back home from school. She was like, "You need a job. They're hiring at the hall." And I was like, "Okay." All right, I guess I'll apply. And here I am 23 years later. But, you know, someone who, you know, who was doing things for me without me knowing she was doing things for me. And that's instilling, you know, a sense of right and wrong and caring for people. As a nurse, that's what you do, but very no nonsense, but in a loving manner. And you never did not feel like you weren't loved or you didn't know where she was coming from. Very honest woman, and just a strong, beautiful spirit, that I was lucky to be her daughter. But she always pushed me. And so, you know, whether that would have been in sports or definitely in school. And I will tell a brief story. And I had got promoted to assistant deputy chief at the time. And so, you know, you go up and get your swearing in speech and whatnot. And I thank her for pushing me and the rest of the family. And she comes up after, she says, "Okay, that's great. So when are you going for deputy chief?" I'm like, "I just got sworn in, woman." So just someone who's like, "Okay, this is great, but next, what are you going to do next? What you can do next?" And it was like that strong belief, like you can do so much more. But, you know, willing to be there for me if I failed at anything or any troubles came. And so she provided that kind of mentorship and guidance for me, along with her sisters, and, you know, kind of her taking over as a mother over my aunts and uncles, and just that mother figure to the whole family within the profession. Definitely Chief James, Stephanie James. To see that woman work, I did not envy. I did not want to be chief looking at Stephanie James, because her work ethic was just beyond reproach. And, even after, how do you do all of that and scrapbook and go to football games and do this? And she's, oh, I got a timer and I do 15 minutes here. And I was like, oh my goodness, but just her dedication and study of probation. So, that was what Chief Fuchs said. Hey, she studied probation and became a student of that. And so I basically sat back and studied her and some of the other strong leaders, like Marilyn Martin and others who were in the organization and throughout the state. And, if you sit back and watch, you can be amazed at some of the treasures you can pick up, even in this group, from listening to women speak in this profession.
Treasures. I love it. That's so true. And, both Chief Butler and Chief James have been mentioned now a couple of times, as was the Wiki website. And both of them in their retirement came back to help us actually research and write the Wiki site. So they're continuing to give and mentor perhaps everybody on this webinar today. So all right, others. Your mentor, that kind of, it sounds like we have a theme. I think, moms rock, right. And certainly couldn't probably do what you're doing without them. So that goes without saying, but it's always cool to hear. As a mom myself, I'm hoping somebody talks about me like that one day.
I can talk. And I'm going to now totally break the rule that you just said. But, I actually feel like I've had equal parts men and women who've been really important mentors for me. I really miss Chief Garnett, who retired at the end of last year. She was a real go-to for me in the last 3 years, which is how long I've been in this role. But, for me, both of my parents really raised me to kind of believe I could be what I wanted once they got over their extreme disappointment that I was not going to medical school. But, actually for me, the person who I looked up to the most in my career is my late dad, because he is a doctor, and he was a doctor, and even though our career choices are totally different, our paths are very similar. He also always took the weird assignment and kind of forged new paths and really kind of transformed the work that he did. But the other thing that I really kind of learned over time, and actually at his funeral, that he was also most known for, was the way that he lifted up and supported other people to do their careers. And so I think that to see those things in equal measure, right, really being a pioneer in a field and kind of building collaborations and trying new things, and then really, really being there for succession planning and for mentoring and lifting up just a whole group of diverse young people that he met through his career are really kind of touchstones for me. And so my mom has made it possible for me to be everything I am, and my dad has kind of given me his map, and so they combine into like a mentor pie for me.
I can identify with that mentor pie. I like it. Chief Rochester.
Well, I don't want to repeat everything that was said. So I will say that originally I'm from Kentucky, a very small town in Kentucky. And so I grew up in a community where, if the neighbor or one of my grandma's friends or someone saw me doing something that I shouldn't be doing, they called me out on it, and they called my mom or they called my grandma, and I learned that way. But one of the biggest things that I think I took away from my time of living and growing up in Kentucky is just to watch the work ethic and knowing and understanding how important that was in family, just to keep the family unit going. We had to work hard, and again, it's a small town, and so there wasn't a whole lot of jobs, and it just didn't come as easy as it seems to be now. There are a lot of jobs, but people don't seem to want them, which is really frustrating for me to see. And then, in my career, I think that I found like my unit, my group, and the people that I trusted. And I continued to go back to those individuals to seek guidance and to solicit feedback on how I could have maybe done things differently, or how I could have strategically planned something better. But it's important that you recognize who those people are, because not everyone is a part of your tribe. So even though they may want to give you some feedback, you need to be able to differentiate who's a part of your tribe and maybe who isn't. And really, I know who those people are for me, and I respect what they have to say. And they're not all of them are in leadership positions within my department, but I've grown up with them in this department. And so I consistently go back to them because I know that I can trust them, and they'll sell it to me straight. And that's what I need. And so I would attribute, that to all the people that I've surrounded myself with throughout my career and in my young life.
I see a lot of people shaking their heads, or maybe that's me because I'm shaking my head. I totally agree, Chief Rochester. I think, I don't know if mentor is actually an outdated word or not, but as I was thinking through it, whether it's, the parents, people who, were really influential for you when you first, were growing up, let alone when you became a professional or those around you. But I really like the concept of a thought partner. And I feel like your mentor isn't somebody who's going to tell you what to do or what the answer is. And, interestingly enough, I think a lot of times some of the questions that we get, people are yearning for the answer, and there is no one answer almost to any problem, especially one that a leader seems to be faced with. And so having people that you can trust, that can help you think through some of those things and help give you confidence to take that next leap or to tackle the problem that's ahead of you. It's that kind of is at least, what I think of when I think of mentors, and it really seems to resonate with what all of you were explaining as your mentor. So, I would just, kind of throw that out there for folks to think about as they're listening, because I do think that, and maybe it's just the conversations I have sometimes with my daughter, like they sometimes just want the answer. And I wish that we had the answer, everybody just had the answer to the tough problems, but that's rarely the case, right? And so women helping women be good leaders seems to be really the theme of today's discussion, and often the theme of almost every discussion that I have with all of you anytime that I get to have it. So I'm glad that we got to share that with a broader audience today, and just want to thank all of you for taking your time. I know it's a busy day, always a busy day, and busy weeks and months for all of you. So it means a lot that you were able to dedicate this hour and a half in talking with us. And for everyone else, I think, these kinds of conversations can also be seen not only in past webinars, which we'll have posted on our website. So if there is interest to hear more, certainly there's the ability to do that. And then also CPOC has a podcast now where we get to have a little more intimate conversations on various different topics. So it's another place to kind of broaden your study of the profession, which I think has been mentioned here as well. So with that, I again just thank you all for listening, and really want to thank the panel for sharing your time with us, and shout out to the women of CPOC. Have a good day.